The old grandfather clock in the hallway chimed too, a sound that used to signal the halfway point of a bustling afternoon. Now it only served to measure the vast, echoing silence. My name is Eleanor Vance, and for 47 years, this house in Maple Creek wasn't just a structure of wood and plaster. It was the living, breathing heart of my world. Now, with Arthur gone, it felt more like a grand, dusty tomb, a monument to a life that was no longer mine. The silence was the hardest part. It wasn't merely an absence of noise. It was a presence, a heavy blanket that smothered every room. It was in the kitchen where Arthur's booming laugh no longer bounced off the tiles as he tried to sneak a taste of the stew. It was in the garden where the gentle snipping of his shears no longer kept the roses in perfect form. It was in his workshop in the garage, a place I hadn't dared to enter for over a year, where the scent of sawdust and oil was slowly, cruelly, fading away. I suppose that's why I finally did it. My daughter, Sarah, had been suggesting it for months, her voice laced with that gentle, worried tone that children adopt when they start parenting their parents. "Mom, you can't do it all yourself. Let someone help with the heavy cleaning, just once a week." I'd resisted, of course. Pride is a stubborn old weed. This was my home, our home. The dust on the mantelpiece felt like a sacred layer of history, not just neglect. To have a stranger come in and wipe it all away felt like a betrayal, an admission that the life Arthur and I had built was now too much for me to handle alone. But last Tuesday, as I tried to push the heavy vacuum cleaner up the stairs, a sharp pain shot through my lower back, and I had to sit down on the landing, defeated. The house seemed to mock me with its size, its endless corners and surfaces. I looked at my own hands, the skin thin as parchment, the veins a roadmap of my 81 years. Sarah was right. I couldn't do it all. So I made the call. The agency sent over a woman named Maria. She had kind, dark eyes that held a quiet sort of wisdom, and her smile didn't feel practiced. She stood on my porch, her hands clasped in front of her, and she spoke with a gentle respect that immediately put some of my fears to rest. "Mrs. Vance," she'd said, "I will treat your home as if it were my own, with the utmost care." We agreed she would come on Fridays, from 9 until 1. I planned to be out of the house during those hours. I couldn't bear the thought of sitting in one room, listening to a stranger tidying up the memories in another. It felt too intimate, too invasive. This morning was her first day. I woke up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I went through the motions of breakfast, my toast, and tea tasteless. I tidied up things that didn't need tidying, a nervous habit. I felt like I was preparing the house for a state visit, not just a cleaning. At 8:45, I saw her small, sensible car pull into the driveway. I took a deep breath, grabbed my handbag and my light coat, and met her at the door. "The cleaning supplies are under the sink, Maria. Please, help yourself to tea if you like. I'll be back around 1. She just nodded, that same kind, understanding look in her eyes. "Take your time, Mrs. Vance. Enjoy the fresh air." Closing the door behind me felt strange, like I was a visitor leaving my own life. I walked down the familiar street, the oak trees just beginning to show the first blush of autumn. I didn't have a destination. I just walked. I ended up at the small park by the river, at the bench where Arthur had proposed to me all those decades ago. It was our spot. I sat down, the cool with a familiar comfort. The river flowed on, indifferent to the ache in my chest. I thought about Arthur, about the first time he brought me to this house. It was a rundown mess back then, but he'd stood in the middle of the empty living room, his arms outstretched, and said, "Eleanor, I don't see peeling paint and broken floorboards. I see our future. I see children running down these halls and our grandchildren playing by the fireplace." And he was right. Every bit of his vision had come true. We had filled this house with life, with love, with arguments and apologies, with scraped knees and birthday cakes, with sorrow and with immeasurable joy. I must have been lost in my memories for a long time, because when I finally looked up, the sun was higher in the sky. I pulled out the old flip phone Sarah insisted I carry for emergencies. It was nearly 11 o'clock. A strange sense of peace had settled over me. Maybe this was a good thing. Maybe letting go of the small burdens would make carrying the larger one, the grief, a little more bearable. I was just about to put the phone back in my bag when it vibrated, buzzing angrily against my palm. I squinted at the screen. It was my own home number. That was odd. Maria wasn't supposed to have my mobile number. I'd only given her the landline for the agency's records. My heart began to beat a little faster. Why would she be calling me? I fumbled with the button, pressing the phone to my ear. Hello. My voice sounded thin, reedy. Mrs. Vance. It was Maria. Her voice was trembling, pitched high with something I couldn't quite place. It sounded like fear. Maria? Is everything all right? Did something break? I imagined a shattered vase, a permanent stain on the rug. There was a pause on the other end, filled with the sound of her ragged breathing. No, nothing like that. Mrs. Vance. I'm so sorry to bother you. I don't know how to say this. The knot in my stomach returned, tighter this time. What is it, Maria? Just tell me. Another shaky breath. I was dusting in the upstairs hallway. I heard a noise from your husband's study. Arthur's study. The one room I had explicitly, if gently, asked her not to touch. A noise? What sort of noise? I asked, my mind racing. A mouse? A pipe settling? It was a chair, Mrs. Vance. It sounded like a person sitting down. A creak. A heavy one. She paused again, and when she spoke next, her voice was barely a whisper, so full of genuine terror that a chill went straight through me, colder than the autumn air. I thought maybe you had come back home, and I didn't hear you. I called out your name. There was no answer. The door to the study is closed. But Mrs. Vance, I'm scared. I think there's someone in your house. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The gentle river, the golden leaves, the peaceful park bench, it all dissolved into a haze of pure, cold panic. Someone was in my house. My mind, usually so methodical, splintered into 1,000 frantic thoughts. A burglar? In the middle of the day? My hands trembled so violently I could barely hold the phone. Maria, I said, my voice cracking. Maria, are you safe? Where are you now? I'm in the kitchen. By the back door, she whispered, her words tripping over each other. I locked myself in. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to make a sound. Stay right there. Don't move. Don't make a sound. I'm calling the police right now, and I'm coming home. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I hung up before she could reply, my fingers fumbling as I tried to dial the emergency number. The operator's calm, professional voice was a strange counterpoint to the chaos erupting inside me. I explained the situation as clearly as I could, my address, the cleaning lady locked in the kitchen, the potential intruder upstairs in my late husband's study. Ma'am, please do not enter the house. Wait for the officers to arrive, the operator instructed. But I was already moving, half walking, half running, my old joints protesting with every jarring step. The park was only a 10-minute walk from my home, but it felt like a marathon across a foreign country. The familiar houses and gardens of my neighbors blurred past me. The thought of a stranger in Arthur's study, his most private sanctuary, felt like a desecration. That room was the last bastion of him, the one place that still held the undiluted essence of the man I loved. It was where he read his history books, where he tied his fishing flies, where the faint, sweet scent of his pipe tobacco still clung to the heavy velvet curtains. The idea of some thief rummaging through his things, touching his possessions, filled me with a rage so fierce it momentarily eclipsed my fear. By the time I turned onto my own street, my breath was coming in ragged gasps. I saw a police car parked at a slight angle in front of my house, its lights flashing silently. 2 officers were walking up my garden path. I called out to them, waving my hand, and they turned, their expressions serious. I explained who I was, babbling about the phone call, about Maria, about Arthur's study. One of the officers, a kind-faced man who looked to be about my son's age, spoke to me calmly. All right, Mrs. Vance. We're going to go in and clear the house. I want you to wait right here, okay? We'll let you know as soon as it's safe. I could only nod, wrapping my arms around myself as a sudden chill had nothing to do with the weather. The next few minutes were the longest of my life. I watched as the 2 officers disappeared inside my home. I saw the kitchen curtain twitch and knew Maria was watching, too. The silence that followed was agonizing. I strained my ears for any sound, a shout, a crash, anything. But there was nothing. Just the whisper of the wind in the oak trees and the thumping of my own heart. After what felt like an eternity, the front door opened again. The officer walked out, his expression changed. It was no longer one of professional caution. It was one of confusion. "Ma'am," he began, "we've searched the entire house, top to bottom. Every room, every closet. There's no one here." "What?" I stared at him, bewildered. But Maria heard someone. She was terrified. She locked herself in the kitchen. "I understand, ma'am," he said patiently. "We spoke with her. The house is secure. All the windows are locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry on any of the doors. We checked the study very carefully. Nothing is out of place." I walked past him, my legs feeling unsteady, and pushed open my own front door. The house was still and quiet, but the silence felt different now. It was charged, alert. Maria was standing in the hallway, her face pale, her hands twisting the hem of her apron. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears of relief. "Mrs. Vance, I'm so sorry," she stammered. I heard it. I swear I did. It was so clear. "I believe you, Maria," I said, though my mind was reeling. I looked at the officers, who were exchanging a look of polite skepticism. They probably thought it was an old house making old house noises and a jumpy cleaning lady. "We checked the attic and the cellar, too," the second officer added. "It's all clear. Perhaps it was a squirrel in the wall or the pipes. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was nothing." I was so exhausted, so emotionally drained, that I just wanted them to leave. I wanted my house back. I thanked them for their time, and they left, reminding me to call if anything else happened. The moment the door closed, a fragile quiet descended. Maria looked at me, her eyes wide with lingering fear and embarrassment. I must seem so foolish. "Your first day, causing all this trouble." "Nonsense," I said, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. "You did the right thing. If you hear something suspicious, you should always be cautious." I walked slowly toward the staircase. "I'm just going to go up and see." "Do you want me to come with you?" she asked, her voice small. "No, dear. It's all right." I climbed the stairs one by one, my hand gripping the familiar oak banister. Each step was a step back into the heart of my life with Arthur. At the top of the landing, I turned right. The door to his study was closed, just as she'd said. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the cool brass knob. I hadn't been in this room for more than a few moments at a time since he passed. It was too painful. Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. Everything looked exactly as I remembered it. The tall shelves groaning under the weight of books. The old globe standing in the corner. The fly-tying station on the side table, with a half-finished lure still clamped in the small vise. My eyes were drawn to the center of the room, to his chair. It was a large, worn leather armchair, the place where he had spent countless hours. The leather was cracked and softened in the exact shape of his body. And as I stared at it, the breath caught in my throat. The police were wrong. Something was out of place. It was subtle, so subtle that only someone who had known this room for nearly half a century would ever notice it. On the small, round table next to the armchair sat Arthur's reading glasses and a thick biography of Winston Churchill he'd been reading in his final weeks. The book was closed, but it wasn't flat. The red silk bookmark, which I knew for a fact had been tucked away near the end of the book, was now sticking out from somewhere in the middle, as if someone had just placed it there to mark their spot. And then I saw the other thing. The thing that made my blood run cold. There, on the worn leather of the seat cushion, was a faint but definite indentation. A slight depression in the exact spot where he would sit, angled just so toward the window. It was as if someone had been sitting there only moments before, their weight pressing into the old, forgiving leather. It looked, for all the world, like Arthur had just gotten up to fetch a cup of tea. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. The police had said no one was here, but someone had been in this room. Someone had been sitting in my husband's chair. I backed away from the study door slowly, pulling it shut with a quiet click. A tremor started in my hands and spread through my entire body. I leaned against the wall in the hallway, trying to make sense of it. The bookmark. The indentation in the chair. These weren't the actions of a common thief. A thief would have ransacked the place, looked for valuables, made a mess. This was delicate. It was personal. I made my way back downstairs, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. Maria was in the kitchen, wiping down a counter she had probably already wiped 10 times, just to keep her hands busy. She looked up as I entered, her face a mask of concern. Is everything? I couldn't bring myself to tell her what I'd seen. How could I? She would think I was losing my mind. The police already thought she was hysterical. If I started talking about moved bookmarks and ghost-like indentations, they would be calling my daughter Sarah to talk about assisted living. So I forced a weak smile. Everything is perfectly fine. The officers were right. It must have been the house settling. Old homes make a fuss now and then, you know. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded, relieved to let the matter drop. I am so sorry for the scare, Mrs. Vance. Don't you worry about it another second, I said, my voice sounding unnaturally bright. Why don't you finish up in the living room? I'll make us a cup of tea. The rest of her shift passed in a strange, surreal quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea I didn't want, while the sound of her vacuuming in the next room provided a semblance of normalcy. But my mind was far from normal. It was replaying the image of that chair over and over again. Who could have done it? And why? The house was locked. The police found no signs of entry. It was impossible. Unless I was imagining it. Was this what grief did? Did it make you see things that weren't there? Did it play tricks on a lonely, 81-year-old mind? The thought was terrifying. All my life, I had prided myself on my sharp mind, my steady nerves. I had managed the family finances, raised 2 children, cared for a dying husband. I was not a flighty or fanciful woman, but the emptiness of the house had been wearing on me. The long, silent evenings were the worst. Sometimes, I would find myself talking to Arthur as if he were still there, commenting on a television program or asking his opinion on a news story. I'd always dismissed it as a harmless comfort, a way to feel less alone. But what if it was more than that? What if the lines were starting to blur? When 1 o'clock came, Maria packed up her things, still apologizing profusely. I paid her for her time, assured her I was fine, and told her I would see her next Friday. As she drove away, I was left alone in my gleaming, tidy house. But it didn't feel clean. It felt violated. It felt haunted. That night, sleep would not come. I lay in the big bed we had shared for almost 50 years, the space beside me a cold, empty expanse. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window pane, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept thinking about Arthur's study, right down the hall. I imagined the door creaking open, a shadowy figure slipping inside to sit in his chair and read his book. Was it a spirit? Was it Arthur himself, unable to leave the home he loved so much? I had never been one for ghost stories. Arthur was the practical one, but I was the pragmatist. We believed in what we could see and touch. And yet, I thought about the life we'd built in this house. It was more than just a collection of moments. It felt like our shared energy had soaked into the very walls, that our love had become part of the foundation. When we first moved in, we'd spent an entire weekend stripping hideous floral wallpaper in the dining room. We'd laughed until we cried, covered in paste and torn paper. I could almost feel the echo of that laughter now. I remembered the night Sarah was born. Arthur had paced the length of the downstairs hallway so many times he'd worn a faint track in the carpet. This house wasn't just wood and nails. It was a vessel for our entire existence. Perhaps a part of him really was still here. The week that followed was one of the longest of my life. I became a detective in my own home. I started noticing other things, or perhaps I started looking for them. One morning, I went into the living room and saw the chess set on the side table. Arthur and I used to play every Sunday afternoon. It had sat untouched since his last game, a checkmate he had delivered with a triumphant grin. But now I noticed that one of my pawns, a small, hand-carved ivory piece, had been moved forward 1 square. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible change. I knew for a fact I hadn't touched it. Who had? A few days later, I found one of Arthur's old vinyl records, Frank Sinatra. his favorite, sitting on the platter of the record player. It wasn't playing, but it had been taken out of its sleeve and placed there, ready to go. My heart ached. I could so clearly picture him doing just that, humming to himself as he carefully lowered the needle. With each new discovery, my theory of a burglar grew weaker, and a far more unsettling idea took root. I felt like I was living with a ghost. Not a frightening, malevolent ghost, but a quiet, gentle one. A ghost who moved chess pieces and wanted to listen to Sinatra. A ghost who sat in his favorite chair and read his book. It was the ghost of my Arthur. And a part of me, a deeply lonely part, started to welcome it. The terror I had initially felt began to morph into a strange, bittersweet comfort. The house didn't feel so empty anymore. It felt like he was just in the next room. I started talking to him more, not just in my head, but out loud. "Did you put the record on, my love?" I'd whisper to the empty living room. "Were you hoping for a game of chess?" I told no one. How could I? Sarah would have me in a doctor's office before I could finish the sentence. My friends would exchange worried glances over their cups of tea. This was my secret. My beautiful, heartbreaking, impossible secret. When the next Friday arrived, I felt a new kind of anxiety. What would Maria find this time? Would she be frightened again? Part of me wanted to call and cancel, to keep my gentle ghost to myself. But another part of me, the logical part that was still flickering faintly, needed a witness. I needed to know if she would see what I was seeing. I needed to know I wasn't completely mad. So, I let her come. I went through the same routine, leaving the house just before 9. This time, however, I didn't go to the park. I drove to a small cafe a few streets away, one with a clear view of my front door. I sat by the window, pretending to read a newspaper, and I watched. I watched my house like a hawk, my nerves stretched taut. No one went in. No one came out. Just Maria's car in the driveway. At 10:30, my phone rang. It was Maria again. But this time, her voice wasn't frightened. It was puzzled. "Mrs. Vance," she said, "I'm so sorry to bother you again. It's just a little thing. It's probably nothing." "What is it, Maria?" I asked, my heart starting to pound. "It's the workshop. In the garage," she said. "You asked me not to go in there, and I haven't." But the door was slightly ajar. I was just going to close it, and I smelled something. I held my breath. "What did you smell?" There was a pause. "It smells like wood smoke. Or pipe tobacco. It's very faint. But it smells like someone was just in there, smoking a pipe." I closed my eyes, a single tear escaping and tracing a cold path down my cheek. The workshop. The place I couldn't bring myself to enter. His scent. Fading for a year and now suddenly fresh. It was him. It had to be. He was here. He was really here. The smell of pipe tobacco. That was Arthur's signature. It wasn't the heavy, cloying scent of cigarettes. It was a sweet, earthy aroma of cherry and hickory that had permeated his clothes, his study, and most of all, his workshop. For that scent to suddenly reappear, strong enough for Maria to notice, was the most concrete piece of evidence yet. My grief-stricken heart seized on it not as a mystery, but as a confirmation. He was with me. My Arthur hadn't left me entirely. "It's all right, Maria," I said into the phone, my voice thick with an emotion she couldn't possibly understand. "Don't worry about it. It's an old smell, I'm sure. It gets trapped in the wood." It was a feeble explanation, and I think we both knew it. For the rest of the week, I lived in a state of heightened awareness, my house no longer a silent tomb, but a place of quiet communion. I would leave a cup of tea on the table beside his chair before I went to bed, and in the morning, though the tea was cold and untouched, I would imagine he had appreciated the gesture. I would whisper goodnight to the study door. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound, aching tenderness. I wasn't being haunted, I was being visited. This house, our house, was a bridge between my world and whatever lay beyond, and he was crossing it in small, subtle ways to let me know I wasn't alone. This conviction, this secret belief, became the center of my existence. It was a fragile comfort, but it was a comfort nonetheless. The world outside my front door, the grocery shopping, the bank errands, the polite chats with neighbors, felt like a performance. The real part of my life was inside, with the ghost of my husband. The following Friday, I felt almost calm as I prepared for Maria's arrival. I was no longer afraid of what she might find. I was curious. It felt like she was my unwitting messenger, the one person who could validate the secret signs I was receiving. What would Arthur show her today? Before I left, a new idea occurred to me, a way to test my theory. It was a little game between me and my husband. On the mantelpiece in the living room, there was a row of framed photographs. In the very center was our wedding photo. We were so young, Arthur dashing in his suit, me in my mother's lace dress. To the right of it was a photo of our son, Michael, on his first day of school. To the left, a photo of Sarah at her university graduation. I took the photo of Sarah and I swapped it with the photo of Michael. It was a small change, but one Arthur would have noticed immediately. He was a man of habit and order. He always said the photos should be in the order they happened. Marriage first, then Michael our firstborn, then Sarah. I smiled to myself. Let's see if you're paying attention, my love, I whispered to the quiet room. I left the house and went on my usual walk, my heart a little lighter this time. I didn't sit on the park bench, but instead walked along the river path, watching the ducks paddle in the calm water. I felt a sense of anticipation, not dread. I was communicating with him across the veil. The morning wore on. 9 o'clock became 10, then 11. No phone call. I checked my phone twice to make sure it was working. A sliver of disappointment crept in. Had he not noticed? Or was he not there today? Perhaps these visits were fleeting, unpredictable. By noon, I started to feel a bit foolish. I had been so certain. Now, doubt began to cloud my mind again. Had I imagined it all? Was I just a lonely old woman arranging her own home and forgetting she'd done it? I walked home slowly, my earlier lightness gone, replaced by the familiar weight of reality. I let myself in the front door. The house was immaculate, smelling faintly of lemon polish and floor cleaner. Maria was in the kitchen, packing her bag. Her shift was over. "Hello, Maria," I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. "Everything go all right today?" "No, excitement." She turned and gave me a warm, gentle smile. "No, Mrs. Vance. Everything was very quiet today. No strange noises at all." "Oh," I said, my heart sinking. "Good. That's good. Your home is so lovely," she said, zipping her bag. "So many beautiful memories here. I was admiring your photographs on the mantelpiece." My breath caught. "Oh, yes," she said, her brow furrowing slightly in thought. "But you know, it's funny. When I first started dusting in there this morning, I could have sworn the picture of your daughter was on the other side. I must have been mistaken." She shrugged, dismissing her own observation. "My mind must be playing tricks on me today." She smiled again. "I'll see you next week, Mrs. Vance." She left. I stood frozen in the hallway, her words echoing in the sudden silence. I could have sworn the picture of your daughter was on the other side. He had seen it. He had seen my little test, and he had moved the photograph back. He had put his world back in order. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't a trick of my own mind. He was here. A wave of triumphant, heartbreaking joy washed over me, so powerful it made me dizzy. I leaned against the wall for support, laughing and crying at the same time. This confirmation changed everything. I was no longer a passive recipient of these signs. I was an active participant. My secret was real. The next week was filled with our silent conversation. I'd leave the crossword puzzle out with a pen and later find a word filled in always when I had been stuck on and always in his familiar, slightly slanted block capitals. I knew his handwriting better than my own. The following Friday, I felt bold. I decided not to leave the house at all. I would stay, hidden away in my bedroom, and I would see if I could catch a glimpse, hear a sound, feel his presence more directly. It felt like a transgression, like I was breaking the unspoken rules of our new existence, but I couldn't help myself. I needed more. I told Maria I had a headache and would be resting upstairs. "Please don't mind me," I said. "Just work as you normally would." She gave me a concerned look but nodded. I went up to my bedroom and closed the door, leaving it open just a crack. My heart hammered in my chest. I sat in a chair in the corner of the room, completely still, my ears straining to hear over the sound of the vacuum cleaner starting up downstairs. I felt like a child on Christmas Eve, waiting for a magic I desperately needed to believe in. The minutes ticked by. I heard Maria moving around the living room, then the dining room. Then I heard the vacuum shut off. The house fell into a deep silence. I listened. Nothing. Then I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She was coming up. My breath hitched. I heard her moving down the hallway, her soft-soled shoes making almost no sound on the runner. I heard the faint swish of her duster. She was dusting the hallway table, right outside Arthur's study. And then I heard it. A sound from within the study. It was a soft, scraping sound. The sound of a wooden chair leg being pushed back against a wooden floor. It was unmistakable. My heart leaped into my throat. It was happening. He was in there, and I was here to witness it. I waited, my body rigid with anticipation. I expected to hear Maria gasp or call out my name. But there was only silence. A long, drawn-out silence. What was she doing? Could she hear it too? Slowly, quietly, I rose from my chair and crept to the bedroom door. I peered through the tiny crack. I could see a sliver of the hallway. Maria was standing there, completely still, her back to me. She was staring at the door to Arthur's study. She wasn't moving. She wasn't making a sound. She was just listening. And then, to my utter astonishment, she lifted her hand, and I saw her make the sign of the cross. A look of profound awe and pity crossed her face. She bowed her head slightly as if in prayer. Then she turned and, as quietly as a mouse, went back down the stairs. I stood there, my mind spinning. She had heard it. She knew. But she wasn't scared. She hadn't run to the kitchen. She hadn't called the police. She had reacted with reverence, with understanding. Why? A new, staggering thought began to form in my mind, a thought so unsettling it threatened to shatter the beautiful, fragile world I had built for myself. I had been so focused on proving my ghost was real, I had never stopped to consider another possibility. What if the person Maria was afraid of, the person she heard, the person she was now praying for, wasn't Arthur at all? I pushed my bedroom door open and walked into the hallway. My destination was not the study. My destination was the full-length mirror at the end of the hall. I stood before it and stared at my own reflection. I saw a tired, frail old woman with haunted eyes and a grief so deep it had carved new lines into her face. And then, with a clarity that was as painful as a physical blow, I saw it. The someone in the house. It wasn't a burglar. It wasn't a ghost. It was me. I was the one who went into the study. I was the one who sat in his chair, seeking his comfort. I was the one who moved the bookmark, desperate to feel close to him. I was the one who put the record on the turntable, yearning to hear our song. I was the one who moved the chess piece, trying to continue a game that was long over. I was the one who swapped the photographs and then, in a moment of sorrowful clarity, moved them back to the way he always liked them. I had done it all, and I hadn't even realized it. My grief was so vast, so all-consuming, that it had fractured my awareness. I was living out these rituals in a state of fugue, a dreamlike trance of memory and longing, and my conscious mind, unable to bear the weight of it, simply erased the act. I would perform the ritual, and moments later, have no memory of doing so, only to discover the evidence later, attributing it to his loving spirit. The call from Maria that first day, she had heard me. She had heard me go into the study and sit down in the heavy chair. And when she called out my name and I didn't answer because I was so lost in my reverie, so far away in my own mind, she thought it was an intruder. The whole thing came crashing down on me. The beautiful, heartbreaking secret was a lie. I wasn't being visited by my husband's ghost. I was being haunted by my own sorrow. I sank to the floor in the hallway, the polished wood cold beneath me. The tears that came were not the gentle, wistful tears I had shed for Arthur's memory. They were racking, gut-wrenching sobs of a woman who had just been forced to look into the abyss of her own loneliness and had finally seen its true, terrifying face. I wasn't just missing my husband. I was losing myself to his absence. The someone in my house was me, a ghost in my own life. And I had no idea how to come back. The polished floorboards of the hallway felt as cold and hard as a tombstone against my cheek. For how long I lay there, I do not know. Time seemed to have fractured along with my sanity. The house, which only hours before had been a sanctuary filled with the comforting presence of my beloved Arthur, had transformed into a house of mirrors, each surface reflecting my own brokenness back at me. The silence was no longer a peaceful quiet shared with a spirit. It was the accusatory silence of an empty stage after a tragic play had reached its conclusion. The star of the show, the grieving widow, had finally taken her bow and collapsed. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up. My limbs ached, but it was a dull, distant pain compared to the sharp, searing agony in my mind. I looked at my own hands, at the wrinkled skin and the prominent veins. These were the hands that had moved the chess piece. These were the hands that had placed the record on the turntable. These were the hands that had pulled the study door shut, only to later discover it mysteriously closed. I was the architect of my own haunting. I stumbled into the living room and sank onto the sofa. I stared at the mantelpiece. The photographs were in their correct order now, the order Arthur had insisted upon. Marriage, Michael, Sarah. A timeline of our love, our life. I had fixed it myself. I remembered now, a flash of a memory like lightning in a dark storm. I had seen the photos swapped, felt a pang of disorientation and a deep, instinctual need to set it right, to restore the order he would have wanted. And then, nothing. The memory had been swallowed by the fog of my grief, only to resurface later as proof of his presence. The rest of that day was a hollow ache. I walked from room to room, not as the mistress of the house, but as a visitor to the museum of my own decline. I saw everything with new, horrifyingly clear eyes. The indentation in his chair? It was where I had sat for hours the day before, my head resting against the high back, trying to inhale the last vestiges of his scent from the leather. The bookmarked biography? I had picked it up, my fingers tracing the letters of his name on the spine, and had absently slipped the marker in while lost in a memory of him reading aloud to me. I was a stranger to myself. There were two Eleanors living in this house, the one who went about her day, making tea and reading the paper, and the other one, a somnambulist of sorrow who walked through the rooms, rearranging memories and leaving clues for her other self to find. And this second Eleanor, the ghost of me, had done it all out of a love so powerful it had unhinged my mind. The realization brought no comfort. It brought only shame. A deep, burning shame that made my cheeks hot and my stomach clench. What would Sarah think if she knew? She would see not a grieving mother, but a woman losing her grip on reality. The fear of being a burden, of being seen as fragile and incompetent, was a fear I had harbored since Arthur's passing. Now it felt like an imminent, unavoidable truth. The week leading up to Maria's next visit was a form of self-imposed purgatory. I was hyper-vigilant, watching my own every move. I avoided the study entirely. I didn't allow my gaze to linger on the chess set. When I passed the mantelpiece, I looked away. I was trying to starve the ghost, to keep the other Eleanor locked away. The house grew silent again, but it was a tense, brittle silence. The comfort was gone. The magic was gone. All that was left was the vast, undeniable emptiness and the terrifying knowledge of my own frailty. I felt more alone than ever before, because now I could not even trust the company of my own mind. When Friday morning came, my hands were trembling as I made a pot of tea. I had considered calling Maria, telling her I was unwell, telling her not to come. But I knew I couldn't. Her presence in this house was now inextricably linked to my unraveling. She had been the unwitting catalyst, the audience to my private madness. And for some reason, I felt I owed her something. An explanation. An apology. When she arrived, her kind eyes immediately registered the change in me. I didn't greet her with the brittle brightness of the week before. I was subdued, my shoulders slumped. I looked and felt like a shattered piece of porcelain clumsily glued back together. "Good morning, Mrs. Vance," she said softly, her voice full of a gentle caution. "Are you feeling all right?" I gestured for her to come into the kitchen and sit down, an invitation I had never extended before. She sat at the table, her hands clasped in her lap, her expression patient. I poured her a cup of tea, my hands shaking so much that the cup rattled in its saucer. I sat opposite her, the old wooden table of vast expanse between us. "Maria," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "I need to apologize to you. For everything. For the scare that first day. For all the strangeness." She looked at me, her gaze unwavering. "There is no need to apologize, Mrs. Vance." "Yes, there is," I insisted, the words tumbling out now, desperate to escape. "You see, the person you heard in the house that day, the person you were so frightened of, there was no burglar. The police were right. There was no one here." I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to meet her eyes. "It was me. You heard me." I watched her face, expecting to see shock or confusion, or perhaps even fear of a different kind. But I saw none of that. What I saw was a deep, bottomless well of compassion. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. She reached across the table and placed her warm, work-roughened hand over my trembling one. "I know," she said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. You know." I stammered. She nodded. "The second week, when I smelled the pipe smoke from the workshop. I knew no one else had been there. And last week, when I heard the chair move in the study. I saw you through the crack in your bedroom door. I knew you were upstairs. I knew it was you in that room. But you weren't scared," I said, my mind reeling. "You made the sign of the cross. You looked. I don't know, Reverend." "I wasn't scared of you, Mrs. Vance," she explained, her hand still covering mine, a small anchor in my swirling sea of confusion. "I was scared for you. I saw a woman in so much pain that she had to visit her husband in his favorite room, even if he wasn't there. My own grandmother, after my grandfather passed, she would set a place for him at the dinner table every single night for a year. She would talk to his empty chair. Grief is a powerful thing. It makes us do things we don't understand, just to feel a little bit closer to the ones we have lost. I was not praying because of a ghost. I was praying for your heart." Her words, her simple, profound understanding, broke through the dam of my shame. A sob escaped my throat, a raw, wounded sound. Here was this woman, this practical stranger I paid to clean my floors, and she saw me more clearly than I saw myself. She didn't see a madwoman. She saw a widow. She saw a heart breaking in slow motion. Her acceptance was a gift so immense, so unexpected, it undid me completely. I sat there at my kitchen table and wept, and she sat with me, holding my hand, until the storm of tears finally passed. When I could finally speak again, my voice was hoarse. "What do I do, Maria? I feel like I'm losing my mind." "You are not losing your mind," she said firmly, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. "You are lost in your sorrow. It is a lonely place to be. You do not have to stay there by yourself." She looked at me pointedly. "Your daughter, Sarah. She loves you very much. You can see it in the way she looks at you in the photographs. Have you told her how you are feeling?" The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through me. "No, I can't. She'll worry. She'll try to take over. She'll think I can't manage on my own anymore." "Maybe," Maria said, her gaze steady. "Or maybe she will just hold your hand, like I am doing now. You will not know unless you give her the chance. Allowing people who love you to help you is not a weakness, Mrs. Vance. It is a strength." After Maria left that day, her words echoed in the quiet house. Allowing people who love you to help you is not a weakness. For my entire adult life, I had been the one who helped. I had cared for my children, for my parents in their old age, and for Arthur in his final, difficult months. To be the one in need of care felt like a fundamental failure. But Maria's quiet dignity had shown me another perspective. It wasn't about failure, it was about love. That afternoon, I sat by the phone for over an hour, my hand hovering over the receiver. I was terrified. But the memory of my own reflection in the hallway mirror, that haunted, lost woman, was more terrifying. Finally, I picked up the phone and dialed Sarah's number. "Mum? Is everything okay?" She answered, her voice immediately laced with that familiar worry. My prepared words vanished. All I could manage was a choked no. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. "I'm coming over," she said, and hung up. Less than 30 minutes later, her car was in the driveway. She came in, her face etched with concern, and found me sitting on the sofa, exactly where she had left me in her mind's eye for months, alone in a house that was too big. "Mom, what is it? What's wrong?" She sat beside me, taking my hands in hers. They were so much like my own, only younger, stronger. And I told her. I told her everything. I told her about Maria's first call, about the police. I told her about the bookmark and the chess piece and the photographs. I told her about my beautiful, secret belief that her father was visiting me. And then, the hardest part, I told her the truth. I told her how I realized it had been me all along, living in a fog, creating my own ghosts. I told her I was scared, that I felt like I was breaking apart. I expected her to be shocked, to be frightened for me. But as I spoke, her grip on my hands tightened, and when I finally looked at her face, I saw tears streaming down her cheeks. They weren't tears of fear. They were tears of empathy. "Oh, Mum," she whispered, her voice thick. "You've been carrying all this by yourself. Why didn't you tell me?" I was ashamed, I confessed. "I didn't want you to think I was incapable." She pulled me into a fierce hug, and I buried my face in her shoulder, feeling for the first time in over a year like I wasn't entirely alone in my grief. "I don't think you're incapable," she said, her voice muffled by my hair. "I think you miss Dad so much that your heart is inventing ways to keep him here. That's not madness, Mum. That's love." We sat like that for a long time. She made us tea, and we talked more than we had in months. She didn't offer easy solutions or platitudes. She just listened. She let me talk about Arthur, about the little things I missed, the sound of his workshop, the way he'd hum off-key, the weight of his hand on my shoulder. Late in the afternoon, she stood up. "Come on," she said gently. "Where are we going?" "To the garage," she said. "To Dad's workshop. We don't have to do anything. Let's just open the door. Together." My heart clenched with the old fear. That room was the one place I hadn't dared to haunt. It was the final fortress of his memory, and I was terrified of what I would feel inside. But I looked at my daughter's face, at the love and strength in her eyes, and I nodded. We walked through the kitchen and out the back door that led to the garage. Sarah turned the old, stiff key in the lock and pulled the heavy door open. A wave of scent rolled out to meet us, the rich, beautiful smell of sawdust, old oil, and somewhere, faint and deep in the wood itself, the ghost of cherry pipe tobacco. I stepped across the threshold, Sarah's hand warm in the small of my back. It was all there, exactly as he had left it. His tools hung in neat rows on the pegboard. A half-finished birdhouse sat on his workbench. A thin layer of dust covered everything, a soft gray shroud over a life cut short. I walked over to the workbench and lightly touched the smooth, worn handle of a wood plane. It was cool and solid beneath my fingers. It was real. This tool, this wood, this smell. They were not figments of my imagination. They were the tangible remnants of a life well lived, a man well loved. Standing there, in the heart of his creative world, I wasn't a ghost, and he wasn't a spirit. I was simply Eleanor, his wife, standing in his workshop, missing him. And for the first time since he had gone, that simple, painful truth felt like something I could maybe, just maybe, learn to live with. It wasn't the end of my sorrow, not by a long shot. But it felt, for the first time, like the beginning of a path forward. The dust motes danced in the single beam of light slanting from the garage's grimy window, each one a tiny, silent witness to a life paused mid-motion. My hand, still resting on the wood plane, felt the grain of the handle, the slight chill of the metal blade. This was real. This was a tool Arthur had held, his strong, capable hands guiding it over countless pieces of wood, shaping them, giving them purpose. For the first time, touching one of his things didn't feel like trying to touch a ghost. It felt like remembering a man. Sarah's hand on my back was a warm, steady pressure. "It's a lot," she said softly, her voice full of understanding. I nodded, unable to speak. My eyes scanned the room, the geography of his life laid out before me. The neat rows of screwdrivers, the jars of assorted nuts and bolts he'd sorted with such patience, the faint, spidery pencil drawings of projects pinned to a corkboard. My gaze landed on the half-finished birdhouse on the workbench. It was a simple thing, made of pine. 3 walls were assembled. The 4th lay beside it, ready to be attached. He had been making it for me, a replacement for the old one by the kitchen window that had finally rotted through. He'd been working on it the week before he went into the hospital for the last time. He never got to finish it, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Sarah stepped up beside me and picked up the 4th wall, running her fingers along the carefully sanded edge. No, she said. He didn't. She looked from the birdhouse to me, her eyes clear. Maybe we could finish it for him. The suggestion hung in the dusty air. It was a terrifying thought. To alter his last creation, to add our own work to his, it felt like a sacrilege. My immediate instinct was to say no, to leave everything exactly as it was, to preserve this final moment in amber. But then I looked at the unfinished object. It wasn't a monument. It was a project left undone, a purpose unfulfilled. To leave it gathering dust forever felt like a different kind of betrayal. It was an admission of defeat. Finishing it, that was an act of continuation. An act of life. A small, fragile flicker of something I hadn't felt in a year sparked within me. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was purpose. I don't know how, I said, my voice thin. He was the one who was good with his hands. Then we'll learn, Sarah said simply. Together. And so began the slow, clumsy, and beautiful process of finishing my husband's last gift. Sarah came over every day that week. We didn't talk much about my episodes, as she gently called them. We didn't need to. Instead, we focused on the task at hand. We found the right size nails in one of Arthur's meticulously labeled jars. I held the 4th wall in place, my frail hands trembling, while Sarah, with a determined look that was so like her father's, carefully hammered it into place. We put the roof on, a little crookedly. We argued over the best place to drill the hole for the perch. We laughed when Sarah got sawdust in her hair. We were not just building a birdhouse. We were rebuilding a bridge between us. And we were making new memories in a space that had been suffocated by old ones. With every tap of the hammer, a little bit of the stale, sorrowful air in the workshop seemed to dissipate, replaced by something fresh and vital. When it was finally done, we stood back and looked at our handiwork. It wasn't perfect. The roof had a slight gap, and the perch was a little askew. It didn't have Arthur's flawless touch. It had ours. It had my shaky hands and Sarah's fierce determination. It was a testament not to his absence, but to our survival. The next morning, Sarah came over and we hung it outside the kitchen window. I filled it with birdseed, and we sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea, watching and waiting. It took less than an hour before a little sparrow, bold and curious, landed on the crooked perch and poked its head inside. I let out a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. A new home. A new life. Right outside my window. When Maria came the following Friday, the atmosphere in the house was entirely different, and she sensed it immediately. I didn't hide upstairs. I didn't sit in stony silence at the kitchen table. I had a pot of coffee brewing and a plate of biscuits waiting for her. Something is different, she said, her eyes crinkling into a knowing smile as she sat down. We finished it, I said, pointing out the window at the birdhouse, where 2 sparrows were now squabbling over a seed. She looked at the birdhouse, then back at me, and her smile widened. It is beautiful, Mrs. Vance. Please, I said, pushing the biscuit plate toward her. After everything. I think you should call me Eleanor. Her eyes softened. Eleanor, she said, testing the name. It is a pleasure. She took a biscuit, and we sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the birds. My husband, Miguel, she said suddenly, her voice quiet. He passed away 5 years ago. He was a gardener. He loved roses more than anything. For the first year, I couldn't even look at the garden. I wanted to let it all die. It felt wrong for the roses to be beautiful when he was not here to see them. I looked at her, my heart aching with a shared understanding. What did you do? One day, she continued, my daughter brought me a small, new rose bush. A yellow one. Miguel always preferred the red ones. She told me, Mama, you can't live in Papa's garden forever. You have to plant a little bit of your own. So I did. I planted that yellow rose right in the middle of all his red ones. And now the garden is ours. His and mine. I looked out at my own garden, at Arthur's perfectly manicured rose bushes, now slightly overgrown. And I understood. You couldn't erase the past. You couldn't live in it forever. You had to plant something new in the middle of it. That day, while Maria cleaned, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I went into Arthur's study, but this time, I went with a purpose. I didn't go to sit in his chair and lose myself. I went to the window and pulled open the heavy velvet curtains, flooding the room with afternoon light. I cracked the window open, letting in the fresh autumn air, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. The room seemed to exhale, to breathe for the first time in months. I ran my hand over the spines of his books, not as holy relics, but as the library of a man I had known and loved. I picked up the Churchill biography. I didn't just hold it. I opened it to the page where I had left the bookmark. I read a paragraph, hearing his voice in my head, not as a ghostly whisper, but as a fond memory. It was an account of Churchill's own struggles, his black dog of depression. I closed the book and put it back on the shelf. We all have our battles. My battle was not with a ghost, but with the black dog of grief. The weeks that followed were a series of small, deliberate acts of planting my own garden. Sarah and I tackled Arthur's closet, a task I had dreaded more than any other. We packed his suits and shirts, not with tears of despair, but with stories. Oh, he loved this old tweed jacket, I'd say. He wore it the day Michael was born. Sarah would hold up a garish tie. "I can't believe you let him buy this," she'd laugh. We cried, yes, but we laughed more. We were not erasing him. We were curating his memory, folding it carefully and putting it away, not to be forgotten, but to be cherished. I started inviting my friends over again. At first, it was awkward. They treated me with a gentle, kid-gloved caution, afraid to mention Arthur's name. But I began to bring him up myself, sharing a funny story, a fond memory. I gave them permission to remember him with me, and slowly, the tension eased. The house began to fill with conversation and laughter again, sounds I had thought were gone forever. One Saturday, Sarah brought her youngest son, 10-year-old Leo, over. He was a bright, curious boy with Arthur's eyes. While Sarah was helping me in the garden, planting a new yellow rose bush right beside Arthur's prize-winning reds, Leo was wandering around the living room. "Grandma," he called out. "What's this?" I came inside and saw him standing by the old chess set. "That's a chessboard, darling. Your Grandpa Arthur and I used to play all the time. Can you teach me?" he asked, his eyes wide. My heart gave a familiar pang. The chess set, another one of my haunting grounds. I had avoided it for months. But looking at my grandson, at the future reflected in his young face, I made a choice. "Of course I can," I said, my voice steady. "Come, sit down. Let me show you how your grandpa taught me." I spent the next hour explaining the pieces, the moves, the strategy. I moved the white pawn, the very one I had once moved in a fog of sorrow, and this time I was fully present. I was not continuing a game with a ghost. I was starting a new one with my grandson. I was passing a legacy on. As I watched him ponder his next move, his brow furrowed in concentration, just like Arthur's used to. I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost dizzying. The love wasn't gone. It had just changed forms. I still have difficult days. Of course I do. Grief is not a mountain you climb and conquer. It's an ocean you learn to navigate. There are days when the waves are high, when a song on the radio or the scent of rain on asphalt can send a pang of loss so sharp it takes my breath away. The silence still settles in the evenings. But it's different now. It's no longer a heavy, suffocating blanket. It's a quiet space where my memories have room to breathe. Sometimes, late at night, the old house will creak and groan. The floorboards will settle, a pipe will knock in the wall. I no longer hold my breath, listening for a sign. I just smile. "Settle down, old friend," I'll whisper to the house. We're all just settling. The grandfather clock in the hallway is chiming 2 o'clock. It's no longer measuring the vastness of my solitude. It's marking the quiet, precious hours of my own life. A life that is still being lived. My name is Eleanor Vance. This house is my home. For 47 years, it was the heart of our world. Now it is the safe harbor for my memories and the launching point for whatever time I have left. There is no one else in my house. There is only me. And I have finally, blessedly, come home to myself.